All right. Welcome everyone to our February SEL virtual book club. We're super excited to be here tonight. In January, we read Brave Not Perfect, and that recording is up now. And this month, we're reading a book that's gotten a ton of press, as it should. It's a great book by a really innovative and engaging author called How to Be an Antiracist. So we're pretty excited about it. So the author of this book, if everyone is not familiar with him, I'm a historian and he's a historian. And that's how I actually was introduced to his work first. He's a professor of history and he works at American University, lives in Washington, D.C., and is just a really great scholar on top of being a great social activist. So I'm excited to talk about his book tonight. He's written a lot of other things, but this is probably one of his most, I think, probably well-known books. It's probably the one that everybody has heard of. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm excited. So what did everybody think of the book?
I love it. I really do love it. I'm all just full transparency. I'm not 100% done with it yet. I'm about 3/4 of the way in, and everything it makes perfect sense. And just reading it makes you look into yourself a lot. So I really enjoyed the book, and it's not a difficult read. It's very engaging. I read a little bit every night, so I wasn't ever dreading it or anything like that. I was very excited to pick up the book. I wish I had finished it all, but it was a really great read so far for me.
No, I agree. I like the part, what I found really interesting, like Amber said, he's a historian and he did a lot from a sociological perspective too. But the way that he wrote it as a biography as well is really interesting. Like the way that he tied it into his personal life with the conceptual stuff and the historical stuff. It was really eye-opening. So after the tragedy, against George Floyd, I read White Fragility, and then I read this. And, it was really eye-opening. It was incredible.
I haven't finished it either. I don't even know. We're kind of relatively new to Memphis, and since we've gotten here, I feel like I'm getting a PhD in like the history of this country. So I've read Stamped, but the youth version. I've done lots of his podcasts where he's been the guest. So when I saw that you were doing this, I had it on my list. So I was like, well, let me rush ahead and try to skim it as much as I can. And my girls are at St. Mary's, and I'm the chair of the board committee for the trustees on DEI. So we're doing a lot of stuff on how to convert to being an anti-racist school. And so we're reading so many things. And I said to myself, as I was reading this, I'm like, I wish we had started with this because it's kind of like a 101 on the beginning of how to even look at race. So I was so excited to see, I think you guys know, if you don't know, we're looking at the school for my son, Lausanne. And I was so excited to see all the stuff that you're doing, but when I saw this pop up, I was like, oh, I have to come, So I'll contribute as much as I can, but I haven't finished the book yet.
Yeah, I know he's written a new one now too. Written and or edited. I think co-author and edited. Is it like
400 Souls?
Yeah.
I'm actually reading that one with this one, and it's
wow.
it's great. It's such a good book. Like, I'm in tears just reading about the true history, and just the storytelling aspect of it is so powerful. So powerful. It's a really great book so far. So I'm kind of 3/4 of the way through both of these books at the same time. And I like reading them together. I really do.
So it's interesting from like a cultural perspective, the way that a lot of us are raised. We think that just like racism is an overt act of bigotry, right? Or intolerance or prejudice. But he really sort of encapsulates it more where it gets into the systemic issues. You know, it talks about systemic racism and racism from sort of a sociological perspective in terms of just everything, the way that sort of culture is stacked against people of color. That's what I thought is interesting. And basically, to me, the premise of it is you're either racist or anti-racist. There's no like in between, right? And as a white middle-aged male, I've never really, sadly, had to think about it. You know, to me, when the term racist is brought up, I think of David Duke, you know, or Richard Spencer. I don't think of voter suppression or sort of the way that districts are redlined and things of that nature. So, yeah, I found it really interesting.
Yeah, I think that that was one of the things for me that was so interesting too, is that he talks about how like the central message is that the opposite of racist isn't not racist, it's anti-racist, but that it's not a static state of being, that you don't have to like, that of course being anti-racist is the goal, and that's the opposite of being racist, but you also can move and grow and learn. And this is very, I think because it's so conversational and autobiographical, and he speaks in a way that is so accessible, I think, by so many people, or for so many people. I think that that's a really powerful part that I took away from it, is just, you don't just decide one day that you're anti-racist. Like it's a constant like work. Like it's not, and I think we're kind of seeing that like right in diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. You don't just write a policy, it's work. And I think that was a big piece for me that I hadn't, I had read a lot of kind of academic works on race, and I do a lot of work as a historian on like the body. And so I understood a lot of what he was talking about kind of theoretically, but I hadn't really ever thought about like the act of being anti-racist and how that's not just a thing, it's a thing that you do, it's a verb, right?
Right. Yeah. Just saying, like, you know, we were all taught, well, I wasn't raised that way. Well, yeah, that doesn't really get it, right? Or we didn't believe that way in my home, or, you know, I believe God created all people equally. Well, that's fine. But to your point, it's kind of a cop out, right?
And welcome, we've got two Elizabeths here. So welcome, friends. Hey. Yeah. So, and this is a very casual environment, so feel free to just pop in whenever too. So we were just kind of talking about like basic thoughts on the book and the kind of central message of like what is anti-racism, and that it's an act, not just a thing you write in a policy and then you're done with it. So, all right. So one of the things that I also thought was really interesting about the book is, so I sent the discussion questions out to everyone, which like, holy moly, that's a lot of discussion questions, but I think there's a lot to like discuss in this book too. And I do like that he puts like some recommended other articles and stuff too. But, you know, one of the things that is in the discussion questions that I think was really both explicitly and implicitly included in this book was like, okay, so I'm going to tell you all of these things. Now at the end, like, what is the thing that you're going to do? And I think the emphasis is on the word do, to be anti-racist. And I think that that's like such a powerful, like, you don't often get that from academic works. So what did y'all think about that?
I think that it's a constant reflection on yourself, reflection on your environment, looking inward and really focusing on being anti-racist. It's not something that you say, oh, I'm an anti-racist now. If you're not constantly working towards that as your goal, you're gonna miss out on those opportunities to learn more about other cultures. And it's not just about Black or white, it's about everyone. And believing in, I'm a, pro human rights person. And it's not really about the color of the skin, but if you're not constantly working towards that, it's a daily effort that you have to put in. It's making those choices and listening and communicating, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that he kind of points out in this book too is that, like, there's such a fine line between, like, I think everyone deserves equal rights and I think everyone is human, and the kind of trope of, like, I don't see color. And so I think that, one of the interesting things that he brings up is that, like, of course you do. Like, of course you do. Of course people see, like, the thing that we have to do is not see color. It's not, it kind of like when he talks about space, right? It's not radicalizing space and not radicalizing color, and, seeing and acknowledging and appreciating differences while not making those differences wrong, right? If that makes sense. And I think that's a huge thing. I grew up in a place where a lot of people just said, oh, I don't see color. And I'm like, but then you're also, like, not acknowledging people's cultures. Like, that's a problem too, friends. Like, and I think that he talks about that though in a way that is a little less harsh than, like, you're the problem, but also really is a call for action to be like, well, we can't get to that until everybody's not awful to everyone else. And I think that's a big piece of what I love, the definitions at the beginning of every chapter, like talking about space. That was the one that really spoke to me was, what is space racism and what is space anti-racism? And, there's this, you have to have anti-racist policies, but those have to lead to racial equality between integrated and protected racialized spaces, which are substantiated by anti-racist ideas about those spaces. And that's huge. So I just thought that that was a really interesting point that he brings up that I think kind of goes against that. Like, I don't see color, but also still acknowledges, like, we're all people.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amber. And I never really thought about it until I read it in the book. Telling a person of color you don't see color basically invalidates the conversation and their feelings and emotions. So, but it's interesting. So a lot of cultural conditioning goes into that, because a lot of us have been taught that's the thing to say is I don't see color, because we really want to believe that, but that's one of the worst things that you can do.
I was going to say, I think it's, I am a person of color. My mom is Irish American. My father's African American. And my kids, I married an African American man. So like hearing that it's a verb, I was kind of like, okay, I'm already too tired. For a person of color, it's like, especially after this summer, like I said to my mom, I said, I didn't grow up during Jim Crow. So this is the first time in our lives where it feels so heavy, the election of the last president and the re-rising of white supremacy, and then the culmination of it in the highlighted deaths of these unarmed Black people, left, right, up, down. I feel like we feel exhausted. And so it was like, okay, wait, what action do I have to take? Like, my action is just to make sure my kids are aware, not, confident, and don't not like one type of people because of what they're seeing, but also, that they're protected and seen wherever they are attending school, especially here in the South. So it was, I wonder, and I guess this is what he's saying, the role or the verb, the action is different for every group of people. And like I've said, since I was really young, because, my parents were an exception, now there are a lot more interracial families, but, during our time, I lived in Northern Virginia at the time. We were one of the few, and they raised us to really analyze and see and, think. And so it's been a fascinating journey to see things kind of catch up to what we were raised as since we were little, and I have always felt, and my white mother said it, the work is on the white people, right? This is their burden to carry, really, not yours, not Black people's, not people of color, you know what I mean? Their journey is to heal and to succeed. White people have to contend with what historically they have done, and then the privilege you get to carry because of that. But I will say it feels wonderful to see this kind of earth-shattering, or I hope, the beginning of some rumblings of like a systematic wake up to what you said, Greg, which is up until last year, it was like, oh, no. You know what I mean? I don't see color. You're fantastic. Oh my gosh. Like that's what you would hear. No, and you always realized that was an erasure of you, but you just kind of didn't say anything and moved on, so to see that that's being acknowledged and that there is so much to be kind of looked at and analyzed and lifted and dug up, and without what I love what he does so well that I think white people are so afraid of is it's an immense amount of guilt to wake up in this country and realize what, white people have done.
Yeah.
And so I've had white friends say to me, how do I raise my kids to not feel guilty? And what I like about how he does it is the action is healing. It's not about you being a bad person. So this book allows everybody, it makes everyone, whatever you are, whatever shape, you have a part in this, which I really did like about it. What that means, big picture, we'll see in terms of me individually. But I think it's a great question that he leaves us with.
No, and you bring up a great point, and thank you for saying about the burden is on sort of white people, because like we're uncomfortable with terms, because I think I might be naive. I think most people are inherently good people, right? But even from a personal perspective, terms like white fragility, it took me a while to come to terms with that and to realize that I do have that. And most white people do have that. And it's tough. I've talked to some of my friends and they refuse to accept that. I'm not a racist. They don't understand the concept of that. So, and there's some good examples whenever there's a conversation about race, like say it's a consultation in the workforce, like in an executive office where you have a lot of people working, typically some of the white people get sort of bent out of shape when the term white fragility comes up, or the concept. And the mere fact that they get bent out of shape is a testimony to how strong that concept is, right? It's just like, okay, I'm going to shut down any conversation where I feel uncomfortable about the subject of race. And the mere fact that it makes us uncomfortable means that we need to have this dialogue. I mean, it's so important.
So I think you're exactly right. In order to change things, there has to be some point of being uncomfortable, because being comfortable in these things is kind of what has taken us to this place. We live in the South. I'm from the South. I'm from rural Mississippi. A grand wizard lived across the street from me. And he changed his ways. So he was actually KKK. He changed his ways, became an awesome neighbor. So people do change, but you have to be in a place where you can look at yourself. And I think that our Southern hospitality, we don't want to ruffle too many feathers. We don't want to be seen as the agitator. And I went to a school in my 9th grade year we were integrating. Up until that point, my school had been totally African American. When in 9th grade, it was horrible because we had parents who had shielded their children away from anything Black in a culture that they didn't have control over. Their maid, the people that work for them, there are good people. But here comes this group of students that they didn't know. And so they were afraid. And until we got to be the good Black friends, there was this, this wall up there. And then it became, well, we don't see color. Oh, Demetria's a good kid. Oh, her dad is a business owner, so she's okay. But I could have not been okay. My dad having a business didn't really have anything to do with my character. But they attached that, that title to me. And then to say you don't see color. And I would always say, you can't miss my color. I'm a very dark-skinned Black person. I don't want you to miss my color. I don't want it erased. It is a part of who I am. But, we just kind of ebb and flow and keep things that are very, at this level of we're all coexisting, but we want allies to change things. I want my son to walk into Lausanne and he's just William. He's not William, the tall Black boy. He's just William there with his friends. So it is. We do not like to have difficult conversations, and I think that's one piece that will continue to be a real hindrance for us.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, I had a thought. I was informed when I was doing my master's degree. I was informed through my friends in my cohort that, as I said, in a gathering, in a meeting, I was associating white supremacy with the KKK, which of course there's an association there, but as my friends informed me, it's not just the KKK, it's this, and like we've been reading, and I'm not finished with the book yet, so I need to say that right now. So mostly I'm going to be listening and learning from others, but it's this blanket kind of thing that I wanted to become, I wanted to do the work to find out where racism lived in me, though I hate to even say it, but I had to recognize that it was alive because of so many different things that I've seen, heard, been bathed in. Though, again, like we said in the beginning, that's not how we were raised, and it's not what we see of ourselves. But I needed to shift around that this idea of white supremacy wasn't an extremist view. It's something much more inside you, or something that needs to be worked on. So I made a big effort to do the work, to become an ally, and to find out where racism lives in me, and to work to become anti-racist. And I mean to live anti-racist, where anti-racism lives inside me, and I do anti-racism work and with love every day on a lot of different levels. And I'm still doing that work. And I think it's going to be a lifetime of work, but it's incredibly possible. It just means all these curtains have to open about entanglements. That I was a ballet dancer. A lot of what was going on in ballet was entangled and enmeshed with racism. So it was to understand, to accept, to start working on what kind of dance do I want to be a part of and to bring about in terms of change, if I can, through the work I'm doing on myself and the spaces I'm opening. So that's where I am. It feels like a lifelong work, and one that I embrace with every part of me as something that is incredibly valuable. But mostly I'm just going to be listening and learning from everybody else for a while, I think.
And I think that that's such a huge part of being, I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons he wrote this book is, look, listen, like listening is work too. And sometimes it's work that I think sometimes we get really excited about, like books or things, and we're like, I'm going to do this thing. And then we forget to listen to the people whose story it actually is. Like, you know, when we talk about racism, like the conversation doesn't need to be just white people who are trying not to be racist. It needs to be people, you know, I think that everyone has a piece in this story, but I put in the chat, I love that phrase that you use, to live anti-racist and do anti-racist work. It is an action, but the burden of it, Makara, kind of like you said, shouldn't be on the people impacted the most by racism. Like people of color, Black people are exhausted, I'm sure. And so that some of that listening has to come from the people who are impacted. Like sometimes we have to listen to people who are, and I think we all are, but I think that sometimes the listening phase is important for determining what you're going to do in that work. So I love the way you put that too.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lifelong journey. I also grew up in rural Mississippi, and it's a place that hasn't changed in decades. And I think people are afraid of change, and anything that kind of skews that change and is people are afraid of it. They run from it. They look at things as this is how it's always been. This is how it's always going to be. And that's why I don't live in Mississippi anymore. Part of the reason. But I think that in order for it to be a global change, and it's not just here in the United States, this is happening all over the world. In order for it to be a global change, we all have to put in the work to make these changes.
Yeah, I think that the other kind of part of that of change is that I know I do. So I'm from rural Arkansas, which is another experience kind of similar to rural Mississippi, just hillier. We have a lot of hills in the Ozarks, but you know, I think that it's frustrating to work hard on change and not see a place you love, and especially people you love, change. I think that can be, that's really frustrating, and it's difficult to watch. And I think it can be discouraging for kind of anti-racism, like that work. we've all got the uncle on Facebook, and we've all, I mean, that's, we've all got that person. But, I see a lot of, and I think that this book is great for people who are really starting that work too. I have a very close family member who is insistent that white privilege doesn't exist, because they're like, well, we're poor. And I'm like, yeah, I grew up poor. And so systemic class problems do exist. But even though I was poor, very poor, being white still gave me advantages. Not necessarily financial advantages in my rural Arkansas high school, but certainly systemic, lifelong advantages. And I think that education is the key to creating that change, but it's so slow sometimes. I think we've seen a lot of speeding up of it in recent months. And it makes me sad that it took tragedies for people to realize that this was that racism was still a problem. But I think if anything good has come out of the conversations we've been having, it's that speed of education has increased. Whether it's doing anything for a lot of people or not, I mean, that's hard to measure, but I think that the fact that we're even having conversations about it is important. And is something that would not have happened when I was a kid.
I thought it was interesting too, sort of his thoughts about Asian people, right? Like when he was in school. And to be a true anti-racist, you have to be against oppression or bigotry or prejudice against all people, really. You have to be sort of intolerant of all that kind of ignorance and mistreatment of all people. I thought that was that was a great point. And we see things like, not to get political because this isn't meant as a political comment, but the last couple of years with I'm thinking of the ban on from certain Muslim countries traveling in the United States, things like that. And I know Jewish people, and I'm Jewish, who supported that. I can't understand that. I'm like, what are you talking about? How can you evolve? Right? It doesn't make sense to me. You're against all prejudice and bigotry, or it's not. It doesn't work.
And I think that's the part that gets really dicey, is what you just said, any bigotry. Because I think, there's lots of folks that are, there's limits to this for them. The conversation about sexuality and gender, and, I think, and to your point about areas that are where they are, right? And then you try to put all of this onto them. It's like, okay, never mind. Let me just shut this completely out. This is way too much, So I think that's what I just kind of wonder about in terms of where we're going and how we're going, is how will all of this play out? Because as the folks that are waking up, and they keep waking up, right? It continues. The folks that aren't choosing to accept it, how do we help, or how do you help the window or something open up for them when it feels like things are getting so extreme? But you're exactly right. Period. Anything where one group is getting more or privilege over another is wrong. It's wrong. And getting folks to really accept that in any culture, to fully accept that is there's still a lot of work to be done. I guess because what I liked about his book too is we've digested this system, right? So no matter who we are, we've still digested it. So it's affected us one way or the other. And so it's literally a dismantling of a system that, you know, was built to support the country that we currently have. So it's going to be an interesting, it's going to be an interesting time. And I guess the more research I've done is just learning, okay, well, I learned a lot. I spent a lot of time studying right after slavery. Once the president that was elected last, that was when my wake up call happened. And so I started to try to understand how in the world, and I really learned that, you know, this is just a continual journey that we have not answered. You know, what happened after slavery with Reconstruction is very similar to Obama's election. Black people did really well. They got elected to all kinds of, you know, and then there was this huge KKK, Jim Crow, burn it down, Tulsa, Memphis, you know, burn down every city, church, school that's Black. It's kind of like we're in that, and you know, Obama's election was the beginning of this, like, oh, no, we got to pull this back down. It's a fascinating, this country is a fascinating experiment, I guess is what the word is.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I remember right after Obama was elected, they started using nomenclature like we're living in a post-racial United States now, which I think we all knew better probably than that. And then we saw. And then to see them try to suppress the vote, like in Georgia and all these different places and all these major urban areas that are predominantly African American, Detroit, Atlanta, Birmingham, all these places where they want to suppress the vote, and they're still trying to, like, you know, some of these politicians are still trying to come up with, you've got to have voter IDs. Well, to me, that's reminiscent of apartheid in South Africa or something, right? You have to have a voter ID and this kind of. So yeah, you bring up a really good point. It seems like it's very fluid. Every time we think that it's getting a little bit better, then we're back to ground zero almost.
But when I came here and voted the first time and they asked for my ID, I was like, no. California, you do not do that. It's against the law. Once you're registered, you show up and you vote. So when they wanted my license and they were double checking it, and I was like, so I'm in the place like, wait, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Why do you need my license? What, you know, even asking me what party I vote for. I'm like, why are you asking me that? So yeah, it's fascinating to see it in action. It's a fascinating thing to see. And it's like, you know, I grew up kind of hearing about it, you know, and school didn't teach it to us, but my parents did, of course. But to see it actually happening is why I think the more we can just learn the truth about this country without bad versus good, just the actual truth, I think that's the beginning, I hope. But the issue is, how do you teach the truth? Who has the knowledge to do that? And then how do you do it, especially with the young ones, the little ones, where I feel like it could really be the beginning of something. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that of course, I have a lot of feelings about teaching as somebody who's taught history. And so just full disclosure, I'm not an American historian. I'm actually a British historian. So I study the people who started the whole problem, in the colonies. But, one thing that I think we've lost the ability to do on a large scale is teach objective history and news. I saw a thing the other day that said, just because you don't like something that's in the news, like the news should make you mad sometimes. And so history should make you mad. Like if history doesn't make you mad, you're not paying attention. And I think that we've particularly in like historical education, which I think encompasses a lot of things like political science and things like that. I think that we've done the opposite of being anti-racist. We're not doing things anymore. We're just saying, here's the facts, but that's not what history is. It's not just the facts, it is a story. And, you know, I think about in where I'm from in Arkansas, they're trying to actually ban teaching the 1619 Project. And not that I think that the 1619 Project doesn't have some criticisms that can be made of it as a historical work, but that's the beauty of the story of this experiment in our country, is that we do criticize it and we do teach a history that is bad sometimes and it's beautiful sometimes. But I think that you can't have, and I think he kind of points that out too, you can't have the beautiful things that happen in history. You can't tell just that story because it's not a real story. It's a story about a made up world. You can't tell those without telling the bad things. And that's where the power comes in. But I also think, to the point that he's making, that's where the discomfort comes in. Like, I mean, we actually had a session at a conference where someone asked, well, how do you teach American history to your Black students as a white teacher? And my response to that was uncomfortably. I mean, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It's necessary work. And I think that that's one of the things that I agree with your point about. Sometimes we overload people who are slow to change with information. That's one of the things that I think we all have to, part of the work is listening. And I think for me, part of the work is figuring out where I can make a difference. Like, I'm not going to be able to affect like policy necessarily tomorrow, but I can tell somebody that that word they used is offensive. And I can teach kids, you know, that this country was founded by people who owned slaves and why they felt that that was okay. You know, I think that all of us have to choose. There's no one size fits all anti-racism either. And I think that's a key piece.
I was going to mention on the subject of education, as my primary position is to keep learning and keep listening. It is the study of primary sources that has really been eye-opening for me, to see that the trajectory from enslaving people to Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex is about controlling movement of people on some level. So eye-opening to see what today, how we haven't changed. And not, again, that's not going to stop me from continuing to do the work in me and outside of me that I want to do. But it's eye-opening, this idea of primary sources and studying them, because, and I see that with my son in the school as a 10-year-old, they're touching on things in an age-appropriate way, which can open understanding in children. And that can lead to compassion, build compassion, and encourage empowerment of everyone. So I'm hopeful. At the same time, it's, devastating too. So, and my daughter graduated from Lausanne in 2011. So, there's a space between the two, and her history teacher, Rebecca Hobson, I think Becky Hobson, I'm not sure if it was right.
Yes, that's correct.
Also mind-boggling, live it, wear it, understand it, breathe it, and be the change kind of thing. And so I'm excited about what can happen at Lausanne with education. And again, like I said, devastated as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, but when we think about teaching students about that history, teaching the Black students about their history, and that they have a history before slavery, as well as a history after slavery. And it's uncomfortable, as, you know, a white teacher teaching that to your African American students, but it's also uncomfortable as a Black teacher to teach it to your white students whose parents really don't want you to even think about telling their children about that, because you're, you know, I'm an educator, and I taught in a school where I was the only Black educator in the whole school. I taught in Oklahoma, and I was the only. There was me and the lunch ladies. So to have me come in and teach about that period in history, the parents were very uncomfortable, and I appreciated the ones who came in and said, we are, you know, we don't know. We don't want, they've not been exposed to this, but why not? Why wouldn't you? But it was just like, we want to keep them, you know, safe. And the parents were awesome, but it made them nervous, and they needed to know that I was going to represent well to their children as their educator. But then I also had that other group of parents who, you know, just don't teach that, skip over it. But why? You know, and it's very difficult to think about being this really great patriot, but I'm going to show the ugly side of something. And that's difficult for people to really understand, and get on board with. Show the whole picture. The picture is the picture, you know, and leaving parts of it out isn't going to help us at all. And it is uncomfortable. I'll say that. Those years of teaching there were uncomfortable for me. I loved it, but then there was this other piece of parents walking in and saying, "Where's the teacher?" Me, I'm the only adult in the room. Well, no, not you, the teacher assistant. I'd like the certified teacher. That's me. But being brazen enough to say that, and being very, you know, open about, well, we didn't realize we had Black teachers. I said, no, you have one Black teacher, and that in and of itself is an issue. It's just me. But that piece of being uncomfortable, and it just, if we don't move past that, we'll never be able to truly communicate with each other and make that change that we want to see.
And that's where growth happens. I mean, whether we're talking about anti-racism or we're talking about learning a new skill, or, I mean, growth happens in that discomfort zone. And I think that we should always be careful to keep our students safe, but that doesn't mean they can't sometimes be uncomfortable. And I think that that's fine enough of a line that people are like, no, you can't talk to your students about that. I'm like, no, they're safe. Like, we're not re-traumatizing anyone. There are beautiful ways to talk about the terrible history of this country. And I think, I was about to put it in the chat, but I think it's kind of important. One of the things that I think a lot of educators do is maybe overcorrect and talk only about the tragedies of people of color in this country. Like, there's never that history that's not framed by tragedy. And I think that that's problematic too. So it's like, because you do want to keep your students safe and you don't want to give them trauma, but you also want to tell them the story, and you want to present people in a way that they're people, not just victims. You know, I know Greg and I probably both know, like, Jewish history sometimes is like that too. You get a history of victimhood. And, you know, being safe and being uncomfortable are two different emotions. And I think we confuse them sometimes. We need to go back and read Permission to Feel, Greg, and see if they're the same emotion. But I think that that's such an important piece to talk about too, is like, discomfort is where you grow.
So
and
part of it is, I know a lot of you have probably heard of Adam Grant, right? He's a famous psychologist, and he has a new book out. I forget the title. Maybe it's something like unthink, but it's really about the concept of unlearning, how education is truly not so much about stuffing knowledge in our head, but having sort of that mental dexterity, that mental flexibility enough to know how to unlearn and to be comfortable to say, not just as educators, but just as human beings, that, I don't know. Because it's not, cognitive dissonance now in our society is a real thing, right? If we look at social media, everybody's an expert on everything, and everybody has their own cognitive biases about everything, and sort of mental flexibility is not a thing, right? It's interesting. Social media is not probably the best litmus test for this from a pedagogical perspective. But how refreshing is it when you hear somebody say, I don't know, or really even going beyond that, oh, I'm wrong, you're right, Like reading that by Adam Grant made me realize it's a real opportunity to learn and to grow, as cliche as that sounds. I almost like now, after stumbling upon that, I like sort of being proven wrong or realizing that I'm wrong or I don't know something, because I'm learning something at that point. I think really that's where this is really valuable in that sense. It's an awkward silence. Either I ended that at a wrong point, or I just blew your minds, or I bored you all. I'm not sure which, but
It's just such a heavy topic too. Like I feel like we could have like 6 more meetings about this book too, which I'm happy to do. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time, because I know and like I feel like I just lost last week too. Like I don't actually know where that went. There was snow, and then all of a sudden it was today. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that one of the things that this book does, and I think this goes back to that idea again of like change is slow, is like every page I had a new thought that I wanted to learn more about. But it also didn't overwhelm me like an academic, like a heavy, like dense text on like the history of racism would do. This makes that so personal, and I think that this is a book that inspires people to learn more, not just tries to shove all the learning at them at once too. So I think that I don't know.
Can I interrupt you for a,
yeah.
I want to get, because I know you like her, Amber, I want to get a Brene Brown quote in here.
Yeah.
I think she had a great quote, something like, with these types of heavy conversations, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. I think kind of that's the way to go,
Yeah. And he was actually maybe 2 or 3 months ago a guest on her podcast too, and it was really good. If anybody has listened to it,
that would be all. Yeah, hearing the two of them would be, I need to check that out. That would really be good. Those are 2 good ones.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, does anybody have, and again, we can have another book club night about this book too. We can have 2 in March if we want to. We're actually reading Brene Brown in March. So, which will be perfect, a perfect lead in. So does anybody have any questions, final comments, anything they want to chit chat about?
Thanks for coming, everybody.
I just want to emphasize the part that you said about it was one of our biggest wake-up calls in the move here where we're from LA, is this victimhood of being Black. And what's fascinating is all 3 of my children, I have a little one who's, too young to, but my 2 not older, I have a 10-year-old and then my son who's 15 have literally very much struggled with the approach here. which is immediately reading, the N-word, which they've never seen before in their lives. All talk about, just really hard subjects. So I love that you are aware and thinking about it. I mean, one of my big take-ons has been with the 2 schools my kids are currently at. To Kill a Mockingbird is very traumatic for a Black child. I actually reread it with my son last year. And I have podcasts on, I've been, because I didn't realize when I was saying, hey, what's up with this book? I hit a nerve. Like the response immediately is like, no, Makara, that's a classic. You can't touch it. And so
Where does he go to school? If you don't mind me asking. I know you said your girls are at St. Mary's.
Yeah, he's at MUS right now. And so, but St. Mary's, it's been the same journey. They read Freedom Train in the 5th grade, and, slavery, the N-word, and my 10-year-old on her own. See, we're still online right now, just our family, because my husband has a high risk, but first chapter, my husband, who's not really as involved, he's like, she does not want to read that. And he's like, can I see it? So we looked at the first chapter, and he was like, she's not reading this book. Met with the school, and the comment he said was, she's not a slave. She's never going to be a slave. Why is it constantly talking about slavery here? So I would love, I love the fact that you're even considering or thinking about that. I think, I think some of these classics that were considered revolutionary was during segregation. So it was for a white audience, a Black child sitting in a classroom with, that's a hard book to read. So anyways, the whole issue of victimhood, there's so many wonderful stories that tell, our history, the Black side, is so triumphant. Look at us. That's how we raise our kids. So yeah, I just want to kind of say thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and same here. I was really excited when I saw this pop up as an opportunity to come in, because my daughter graduated from Germantown High. There were some books that were kind of questionable. We just kind of worked through it. And when William came into Lausanne in 8th grade and they read To Kill a Mockingbird, my friend is a literature teacher in the Bronx, and she was just like, he can't read that. He can't read that. We worked through it. I said, I'm not troubling the waters. We just stepped into these waters. But interestingly enough, he's a 10th grader, and he said to me, they just finished reading Their Eyes Were Watching God. Mm-hmm. He said, why does every book we read show such a hardship for Black people? He was just like, you're the literature lady. What do you know? What are the other books that we could be reading? And usually he just wants me to shut up and not talk to his teachers, especially, but he's just like, you're not their coach. You don't need to give them professional development. Don't try to do all that. And I'm just like, I'm going to just kind of slide this in. He's just like, no. But he said, don't you know some books that we could read that don't have to show Black people having such a hard time? I'm sick of talking about how difficult life has been. And, and it is. And I was just like, oh, okay. That kind of hit me, because he doesn't love to read. He can hold a great discussion about whatever he's reading, but he's never cared for reading. So I've always kind of had to push it on him. But to get into, now I will say he has loved the discussion with his teacher. She's done a masterful job with it. And I'm really grateful for that. She didn't make it seem so heavy for them, but just the thought of, here's this 10th grade boy saying, I am so tired of discussing the hardships of Black people. Can we be seen in a different way?
My
And
10-year-old said that, Demetria. That's what she said. I said, Sophia, is it that you don't want to read? I got worried. I'm like, do you not want to read about Black people? And she goes,
Right.
no, mommy, I love reading about Black people, but I don't want the main story to just be sad, 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 sad. And she got teary. Her eyes welled up with tears. So we actually did go meet with the school, and we did a different book, and they're going to change it next year. But, I do think, I love that you brought it up, Amber, without it being us, you know what I mean? I think, again, back to the awakening, I think there's a big rumble, the earth is shaking some, where all intentions, I think, were probably great. Like I said this to MUS, since I'm being totally transparent, in my meeting about To Kill a Mockingbird. I said, I'm an educator. I haven't said that, but before having Noah is my son, I would have agreed with you that we should read this book. I said, but I sat and watched him read it. And I'm telling you, it's not okay. And I got teary, and then they were all teary. You know what I mean? I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah. And I mean, we absolutely love Lausanne, but like with everywhere else, there are little things, because everywhere you go, we got these humans, these humans, man. These humans, they keep messing things up. But I can't say that we've had any issues where there's intentional ill will. Sometimes people don't think about things that they're saying, and sometimes you have these preconceived notions about the children who are there, especially our children of color. And my son is a football player, so, and there's not always the expectation that he has to do a little bit more. Like, I forced him into HL chemistry. He was not happy with me. Absolutely loves Mr. Shaner, but he's there for academics. Football is, it's just his little cherry. He's here because of the academics that I saw and what I wanted for him.
And thank you guys both and everyone for doing that work, because without your voice, without you having those uncomfortable, confrontational or not conversations, teachers would never know. Because once again, you said sometimes you just don't think about it. And in order to do this anti-racist work, we really have to look inside ourselves and think and listen and learn. So thank you for being advocates for everyone. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll be totally transparent too. I had always been uncomfortable with the any people in history as just victims, but it actually, and when I send out the recording, I'll send everyone a link to this because I think it's that important. I listened to an episode of the podcast Criminal, which is very, very good. And an episode that she did, I think maybe last year or year before, kind of really hit home for me. It's about Robert Smalls, who was, for anybody who doesn't know who he is, he commandeered a gunboat during the Civil War and broke through the lines. And he was the first Black commander on the Union side. And I don't know anything about the Civil War, from a historical perspective, because it's just not, I've taught it, but it's not my field. And so hearing that was amazing, and hearing that story. But his great grandson was on the podcast, and he said, I think that my great grandfather's story is so important, not just because he did this awesome thing. He steals a gunboat from under everybody's nose, and he's a cool dude. He said, but I think it's an important story because he's not a victim, and he doesn't ever, history has not portrayed him as one. And it's a story that we don't get taught. He's like, I only knew about him because he's my relative. He goes, you think I got taught about this in school? And I thought that was just such a powerful statement of, why can we not tell stories where we are not the victims, while still recognizing that the history of this country has been systemically unfair and biased towards people of color and Black people and Indigenous people? Why can't we have both of those? Why can't we have an understanding of systemic racism and also not be a people who are victims.
Mhm.
And I just thought, oh my gosh, like I needed somebody to lay that out for me and like help me organize these thoughts. But I'll send the link to that episode because it's also just very good. But thank you for kind of validating that thought, because I think that that's an important one that is hard to come to. And then when you get there, you're like, oh, I got it, you know. But that's been some of my anti-racist work, is how do I teach a history that isn't traumatic, but that is uncomfortable, but that also doesn't hurt kids, but that also makes them think, you know, how do you do that? And I think that that's hard to do, but I think it's good work. It's good trouble, as John Lewis would say, right?
What a great conversation
Yeah.
tonight. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This has been like one of the best conversations that we've had about a book,
It's been great.
in general. So thank you.
Good. This was really good.
Yeah, thank you.
Y'all jump on next month. We have Brene Brown, which will be good too.
Yeah.
And then we have our, I think Miss Davis, you've been on our speaker series.
I have.
So we have Dr. Patrice Reed, who's a pediatrician, and she's going to talk about building resiliency for children on March 16th, right, Amber?
Yep.
It's 7, so that'll be a really good one. She
Yeah.
is sensational. So
Yeah, you know, we've got a ton of stuff coming up this spring. So when I send the recording out, which probably will be tomorrow, maybe, I'll include some stuff that we've got going on, because I would love, you know, to continue these conversations with you, to bring other people in. Like, we want to kind of build this community of conversations. So yeah, so we've got, we're reading The Gifts of Imperfection in March. I'll make sure I send the link out to that. And then we're also having Dr. Reed is going to speak in March. And then in April, we also have a one-day conference too, that is really about kind of productivity and that kind of stuff. But around that time, we're going to announce the schedule for our big summer conference too, which in theory is about tech, but is also about a lot of other stuff. I always do a session about equity and technology. And so it's a really interesting kind of group of sessions. So I'll make sure everyone gets the information about that. Thank you so much for being here. This was like a delight.
Thank you for hosting this. It's a great way to end the day.
Yes.
good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see
Okay,
you all.
thank you.
We'll see you all soon. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.